The Mac and Pete Project.
All right, let's move on to the Naked Now.
The Naked Now. This is a play off of an original series episode with a similar name, The Naked Time, which was also in season 1 of the original series, and it's almost the same type of thing. Everybody gets high on ecstasy and runs around and tries to kill each other or make love. It has like this alcohol type effect where there's like, and I don't know if the original series had the same because I'm not remembering the details. I only remember the imagery of the original series. But the Naked Now in TNG, you have some great scenes where Riker brings up the Enterprise and Data is going through and searching. And I know you've talked about this, Pete, with Data having like been in Starfleet for a while, and then he doesn't understand like regular colloquialisms.
Seeking an instance of someone showering in his or her clothing is...
I know, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack.
Why should anyone wish to expend his time in such a search?
Correction, Data. I should have said proverbial needle in a haystack.
A human proverb, as in folklore, or an historical illusion, or tribal memories.
Historical.
Supposedly been activated for about 20 years at this point.
Yeah, and he's like, a needle in a haystack? Oh, I'm sorry, Data. I should have said proverbial. Oh, well, like it was like that. And this is the first time that we see a science ship, what's called a Sokovsky. And what class ship was that, Pete?
It's a Oberth.
An Oberth class.
Like from Star Trek 3.
Star Trek 3 was where that was.
That was the USS Grissom.
So this is the first time on television we've seen it. And they're going to, and you hear within the first couple of seconds there, and that's another one that I like. They were using some TNG style music, dun 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 dun, when they blow the air. You're there. You've now trying to save the ship from a bunch of drunk people, and slowly as the episode goes on, they are more inebriated to the point where now this star is getting ready to explode, and now it's a rush to time to get the ship activated again to get out of there.
The name of the ship is the Slavkovsky.
Slavkovsky.
The father of Russian rocketry. And the class of ship, Oberth, is a German rocket scientist as well.
I don't know if that was on purpose since they're very far apart, but that was tongue-in-cheek.
I think it's connected to the solution of the problem, conservation of momentum, just using the tractor beam in reverse to repel to give them enough push. And of course, I guess this is the episode we want to bring up that Data and Yar had sex.
And what I want now is gentleness and joy and love. From you, Data, you are fully functional, aren't you?
That's an ongoing joke through all the way up until Star Trek First Contact.
I am fully functional, programmed in multiple techniques.
Where he almost says the exact same line to the Borg Queen of "I'm fully functional in multiple ways."
I am programmed in multiple techniques.
You jewel, that's exactly what I hoped.
And her outfit was very not just 80s, but it was like, Red Alert, Captain Kirk, it's right there on you. It was, and then that again was the episode where Yar had mentioned to Troy about, you always wear such nice clothes off duty.
Yeah.
You're always off duty, apparently.
Our next episode is probably the worst episode of the season and the worst episode of all of Star Trek, possibly.
Code of Honor is way too racially driven. As any other, if you would have made them an alien race and kept the culture, sure, no problem.
The story's fine if it wasn't just a huge caricature. It falls into the original series trap of, hey, we have an episode that takes place in this old West town, we're going to have a shootout. oh, hey, we have an episode where the Greek gods are real. Oh, hey, we have an episode where we have Native Americans. It's not because planets in the Star Trek universe are carbon copies of Earth. It's because we're on a low-budget TV show. What props do we have access to?
Yeah.
And it's like, I did not want Next Generation to fall into that same rut where we're like, oh, we're just going to have things similar to Earth around the galaxy.
To give it some texture, to give it some saving grace, as I called it, in the last little bit of the episode, there's a fight between Yar and a female on the planet, which I don't remember. But she gets transported back to the Enterprise and saved because it's a fight to the death. And in that moment, the one gentleman who was like second in command becomes now first in command because of the way that their culture is. And there was tension, and all of a sudden the tension ended. And just the one comment of his where you might have technology, but we are more civilized.
As you see, Captain, you may excel in technology, but not in civilized behavior.
That's an interesting premise because throughout the push of Next Generation, it's very character driven, and character driven is driven on emotion. So that would probably be the point where I would say, if it worked out that clean and there was no animosity later, sure, you know, could they have done better with the presentation and not recycled props? Yeah. So that's my only positive comment to a rather dismal episode.
How sad for you. You've lost everything.
Now we're on to the Last Outpost. The creators wanted a new villain to replace the Klingons.
Now, the funny thing about that is you feel that there's someone behind the scenes pushing you to dislike these guys. Like, they're always written to be just nasty. And it seems to me that none of the fans felt that they were bad. You know what I mean? They didn't feel like it was more mischievous. That was the feeling I've always gotten from the Ferengi. And especially in that episode, because the way that they act, and if I'm not mistaken, this is the first outing for Armin Shimmer. Zimmerman. He was a guest star. Was he not on that? That was.
He was the lead Ferengi. He was the first Ferengi.
It looks like gold. Tastes like gold.
So, and later, of course, we get into DS9, which Quark is the staple when it comes to Ferengi.
The unrelenting lust for profit. Broik, what are the drinks? Impeller, rig the Davo table.
But this episode was kind of a harken back to there's an alien world, and now we have to work together with our enemy to solve a problem, a puzzle, which Star Trek does on a frequent basis.
They wanted to treat the Ferengi as a modern threat, as opposed to warriors. They were very blunt about them being the threat of capitalists.
I don't want to say I'm in love with capitalism. I think, of course, it has its problems, but I don't think capitalism should be treated as an enemy when it's just an idea. Because in DS9, it was approached by where we would like our capitalism to become when ROM becomes the Grand Negus, where you don't have to be completely greed-oriented for capitalism to work.
I don't want to say they treat it as evil. I think they treat it as being weaponized.
That would be a better way of saying it. I know that you haven't seen Discovery yet. You're going to be surprised with a few storylines.
Okay.
And why I said they turned it evil. Evil? I'll leave it at that, because I'm sure that at some point, begrudgingly, we will talk about Discovery because it is Star Trek?
Yeah. I mean, there was a stamp on it, but
There was a stamp. There's a trademark, right?
we'll save that for later.
Proof of their barbarism.
The next episode is one of your favorites, where no one has gone before.
No one has gone before. And the reason why I like this episode, there's two things for me that I really enjoy in science fiction. I want to go where no one has gone before. I want a junker like in Star Wars, ship quality, or I want the real sleek. I like ships. The storyline was one where you have the Traveler, who appears as this assistant to this guy who pretty much doesn't know anything. But he comes on board, and then this, of course, starts the discussion of how many chief engineers are on board the Enterprise D in season 1.
I think he's like a civilian scientist. Does not wear a comm badge.
Oh, I didn't think about that. He's just in an engineer's uniform. In that episode, you have where you're introduced to the Traveler, and then, of course, you realize, Wesley at least realizes as he's watching, that it's the Traveler that's making the ship be propelled faster than they thought warp drive could go. And then you get kicked into these different galaxies where physics as we know it is just turned upside down. And then you have these beautiful aesthetics that are going on outside of the ship. And then you come full circle where you think the Traveler has disappeared, but he's now, I'm assuming, phased out of the space-time continuum because he used so much power, and comes back and then introduces what you think Wesley's story becomes, where he's this Mozart.
You have it in your power to encourage him without interfering.
Our physical reality as we know it is, very tactile, and we touch it and we see it, we feel it, and we perceive it in a certain way. Where in this episode, where science fiction is very good, it makes you think that there's something beyond that, something more, where he even says there's thought and time and space is actually one thing. And the Traveler's warning Wes, don't talk like that. That is, it's beyond where you should be thinking, but he's in the right direction because he's analyzing and seeing what the Traveler's doing to make the Enterprise go where no one has gone before.
Wesley is such a person, not with music, but with the equally lovely intricacies of time, energy, propulsion, and the instruments of this vessel.
Do you want to hit hide and Q?
Yeah, I think, just briefly. The things in this episode, we basically Q's up to something, as always. He separates the crew.
Where are we?
While Picard's interrogating him, he kind of finds out that Q's here to try to make one of the humans, Riker, to join him as a Q. And basically, Riker is able to explore this new godlike power.
Yeah, and I think that the episode's very well written in. There's two things that we get introduced to that we really don't know about. We get the feeling by the end of the episode that Q is not this kind of like Trelane from the original series, where he's like this little kid that's just popping around and doing whatever he wants. He was sent on a mission. He was sent by the Continuum to do something. And at the end of the episode, he gets punished pretty much by taking, oh, you didn't hold up your bargain, Q. What do you, and takes off into nowhere.
No, if I could just do one more thing. Q, I strongly suspect it's some explaining you have to do now.
So we find out more about that later, but in that point, we know more about the Q's, their character, their nature, their hierarchy. But then we get this insight about maybe they were non-corporeal at some. They were much like humans were, but they forgot what it was like. And we don't touch upon that until Voyager. And then you get Riker and that storyline, and you touched upon that, where the journey's probably more important than the destination. And I think that that's a lesson that a lot of people don't learn until later in life. And I think, like, in that brief moment where he says that, Captain, how did you know? That's just that moment he realizes it.
How did you know, sir? I feel like such an idiot.
Quite right. So you should.
Next is we have Datalore, which is the first data-centric episode, and it just happens to be that while the Enterprise is en route to its next mission, they're passing the Omicron Theta colony, which is where Starfleet found Data 26 years ago. I forget, why was the reason they came back to the colony at the beginning of the episode?
They were in the neighborhood type of deal. That's kind of the way. But then in long-term scans, I think that they realized the colony was gone. So they definitely had to investigate at that point. And this is the first episode we get introduced to Data's brother, Lore.
They find an android that looks like
They
Data.
find an android copy of Data, who we later find out is named Lore, who I think was created before Data was, but with emotion. From the retrospective, and you think about it now, I'm assuming that Dr. Sun, in his wisdom, went, Lore's not that nice of a fella. I'm going to deactivate him and try again and not do the emotional thing.
Yep.
Is probably why. Just a side note, Pete, because Dr. Sun, I'm assuming, is Asian, Japanese, or Chinese, one of the Asian ethnicities. You see, when you open Lore's cabinet or wherever he's stored, and there's characters up on the top. Just one of the Star Trek Easter eggs that I love to see. But they go ahead, and Data's in awe, and he wants to put Lore back together, which turns out to be a bad idea.
They start noticing the difference between Data and Lore. Lore can be rude.
I'll be more careful.
Oh, yeah.
He's superior. He talks to Data. He's like, when can I get a uniform like that? And he's like, well, you got to spend 4 years at the academy, 12 years as an ensign.
And I think Data's facing that because he's always wanted to be more human. Data's story arc has always been the search to be more human. Was it season 6 when he meets Spock, and he says to Spock, "Hey, I wanted to be more human." And Spock's, "Are you kidding? You're like the perfect Vulcan. Why do you want to be more human?"
Mm-hmm.
So the Data story arc is almost like a yin and yang quality with Data and Lore. They're opposites. They're very much black and white. And I think that plays very well on screen, and especially because they look alike. Towards the end, Data's, I think, really rethinking, does he really want emotions now when my brother is this way?
Yep.
So I think it's a very deep, thoughtful episode for Data overall.
So essentially, we have the classic evil twin incapacitates and tries to take over to do what he wants to do, and that's basically to do the same thing he did to the colonists, is sacrifice the Enterprise crew members to the crystalline entity.
Correct. And that's, of course, we get introduced to the crystalline entity, where we now realize it's what destroyed the colony.
But yeah, and then this is just along the Wesley Crusher story arc. He believes that Lore has replaced Data. No one else is believing him.
That builds friction, and that also goes to what I believe they wanted the storyline to be like. This kid isn't stupid. I mean, he's observant. He's going to be in Starfleet someday. I mean, so I think that's where they intended that small undering storyline to go, and which they pick up upon the same vein when he and the guest star of one of the Judd's daughters, and the game takes over everybody in a later, almost the same exact thing. He realizes something's going wrong. He's trying to fix it. Yep. And Data, it's kind of a flip on this one. Data saves the day as opposed to Wes. So, yep. But in this episode, it's Data and Wesley working together.
And Lore's beamed out into space, left to die.
Mm-hmm. Or so we think. Oh my.
Wesley, now!
Heart of Glory is our first Worf-centric episode.
Mm-hmm.
Simply comes down to they come across 3 Klingon fugitives.
No.
And by the end of the episode, they almost all end up dying.
Yeah.
But it's basically we get to explore a little bit more of Worf's heritage. I guess his conversation with the Klingon commander at the end.
That's probably the caveat in that episode, because other than that, you get the sense that Worf has really not been around Klingons.
When your tour of duty on the Enterprise is complete, consider serving with us.
I am honored. I was just being polite, sir.
This is not the typical Klingon.
Mac, I think you wanted to talk about Symbiosis.
Okay, Symbiosis is not a favorite episode of mine. The only reason that I really like it is that Judson Scott and Merritt Buttrick are in it. And those of you who aren't familiar with that, Peter, I know you are. Judson was the lieutenant of Khan in Star Trek II, and then Merritt was Kirk's son in Star Trek II and then 3.
Where's Dr. Marcus?
I'm Dr. Marcus. He killed everybody we left behind.
They're a part of the Star Trek family, carryovers. Other than that, there's these aliens who have this ability to hold a static charge and shock you, but part of the people are addicted to drugs that the hierarchy, the upper class, have them addicted to. And I don't know, it made it seem like at some point they had the same homeworld in the same solar system.
Yeah.
But now they don't share the same world anymore. And the Enterprise comes across them, beams them on board, and they're more worried about the cargo, which is the drugs, than they were about their own lives, which in the process they lost 2 of their comrades beaming over. And you get the feeling as soon as you come into contact that something's going on, because the nonchalant nature of, which is Merritt Buttrick's character as the captain, and I don't remember his character's name, is, oh yeah, sure, that'll be nice. It was kind of, no biggie, no big deal, because we're high. There wasn't a lot more when it comes to a story about addiction. I don't feel as if it was.
No, I think to get some historical perspective, this was 1987, so we're at the height of Reagan's war on drugs.
This was a big deal then, yeah.
But essentially, you have 2 people, both their planets have been ravaged by this plague, and it turns out the planet that has this one resource where they can harvest and create this drug is the only cure. They're begging Captain Picard to just hand over the cargo. My people are going to die without this drug. And through some medical investigation, find out it's not medicine, it's a narcotic. And the plague that these people have been suffering from has long been cured, and now they're just being dealt drugs. Picard refuses to intervene in an internal matter.
Without the freighters, there will be no more shipments of Felicium. We will die. Captain, I hope you realize what you've done to us.
Of that you can be sure.
Basically condemns his whole entire planet to go through severe withdrawal. And eventually is helping them to get over their addiction.
The Prime Directive is not just a set of rules. It is a philosophy, and a very correct one. History has proved again and again that whenever mankind interferes with a less developed civilization, no matter how well-intentioned that interference may be, the results are invariably disastrous.
So in Skin of Evil, it's not just that we see. Now, I want to get your opinion on something, Pete. What is your feeling on Tasha Yar's story arc throughout season 1?
I feel like she was never really explored well. She had more exploration after her death than before. So
she's kind of like a painter that she got famous after her death.
Because all we really know from her is that she came from a Federation colony that failed. And
Correct.
basically just everything, the worst parts of humanity came out. Drugs, violence, and rape gangs, and just fighting to survive and just to do everything to get off that planet.
Right.
I feel like that's all we really know about her.
Yeah, and as you said, there was an episode with her sister whom had a relationship, not a romantic one, but had to Data that brought through some of the roots of Tasha and her past to where she later went before her death. But in this episode, we are introduced to what's his name, Pete? The Tar entity. Armis.
Yeah, I think that's right. Armis.
Which the episode's very correctly named because apparently maybe centuries at this point, the inhabitants of the world, that say very driven by meditation and getting rid of their negative feelings, very centered people, somehow focused all of their negative emotions and it turned into this tar pit sludge that is now an entity, and they left the planet and now he's just left on this dusty rock. Deanna Troi and like a crew member who actually had a name, which usually doesn't happen, is stranded in a shuttlecraft on the surface where they can't beam them up because Armis is blocking somehow the beaming process. They beam down. Tasha gets killed in the process.
We won't hurt you, but we must help them.
Jonathan Frakes goes into a pit of ink as an actor. So I bet that was an interesting experience. Skin of Evil is probably one of the first ones that you named from season 1 because you lose a main character. And on that note, I would say that if somebody said, could you pick a couple episodes that you should definitely watch, I would probably say that Skin of Evil should be one because from Tasha Yar's little holographic message at the end, she fully synopses in a very short period all of the characters that we carry forward into the last 6 seasons of who they are and really what they're about. And that's probably the biggest takeaway from the episode. But 2, you get the sense that there is true evil in the universe with someone like Armis. And I think that that's a very foreboding thing. And that highlights kind of the way the story arc goes to the latter part of that season.
One last comment on that makes me wonder, how often do Starfleet officers update their hollow will or Last Testament?
Last Will and Testament? I would probably make the assumption that, because you're right, because what we see is Yar's just meeting these people.
She does it on a monthly basis.
Yeah, if you say so, let's say that this is her first year on the Enterprise, and she's spent 10 months with these people. Now, do I feel like she could develop that type of emotion for those people in 10 months?
Never forget I died doing exactly what I chose to do. What I want you to know is how much I loved my life, and those of you who shared it with me.
And I think, interestingly enough, when you fast forward to, we'll talk about this in a later season, yesterday's Enterprise, she was very good at, this is where Tasha Yar would be if she was still alive. I felt like she did progress her character, but and that's another one where if you watch all the Yar episodes post season 1, you're able to see, even though it's in a different dimension type of deal, but different reality.
Shall I tell you what true evil is? It is to submit to you. It is when we surrender our freedom, our dignity, instead of defying you.
I will kill you and those in there.
But you will still be here. In this place. Forever. Alone. Immortal.
We got Conspiracy, which I feel should have been a 2-part episode, possibly a season 1 cliffhanger.
Yeah, with Home Soil being the first part of that.
This admiral and his assistant come on board, and they're basically investigating irregularities of the first season. Basically, trying to break him, and they're like, at first they like think, is he going after Riker? What's going on here? It's like, oh, Picard has lost control of the ship to a Ferengi, and it's like, and Troy's like, well, he was under a mind control device. It's like, oh, you let this person take the Enterprise to the outside the galaxy, and it's like, well, it was under Starfleet orders that he was allowed to test their engines. Just trying to find out like what's going on here. They're not after Riker; they're actually after Picard. And at the end of the episode, we find out Admiral Quinn is like, I got to see that you were who you really are, because there's some weird things that happened this past year. I need to make sure I can count on you. I want you to come become the Commandant of Starfleet Academy so I can have you close nearby, because something's not right in Starfleet.
And in that episode, it makes you feel as if being Commandant of the Academy is a big deal. Where in later episodes, and you get that it's not. Like, you would think the chief of Starfleet operations, that is like more of a bigger position. So we're not
whatever you're more comfortable with teaching, or actually,
Yeah, and that's Picard, because he's very much, and we find out, into archaeology, and that's another where we get to explore. So, but one of my favorite parts in the Home Soil episode was when the lieutenant comes in and he's just bereft. Really did try and rip these guys up and didn't. And he's walking out and he says, "Captain, I'd really like my next assignment to be the Enterprise." Are you kidding? So, but then that leads into where we pick up on Conspiracy, where Picard gets this hail out of nowhere from, I guess, an old friend from Starfleet to meet on a planet out in the middle of nowhere with like the top 4 captains in the sector.
We all came secretly, Picard.
Long story short, they go back to Earth. Once you get to Starfleet, they're not operating right. One thing I do want to point out, because a lover of the original series, is this is the first time we've ever seen Starfleet Academy on television. We've seen Starfleet Academy in the films. But when you look at it, I don't know if you had this feeling, Pete, but it was very much had the feeling of the original series when you got down to Earth. Like, the design, a lot of the artwork, it had to me a very original series feel, which kind of, I don't know if it made me feel like, why is Earth farther behind type, or is it another, we didn't have enough money, we just reused props type of deal? Which
I mean,
could be,
definitely that.
but I enjoyed that as a fan of the original series. We're sitting around the table, and they're now figuring out that they're being possessed by a parasite that is taking over the minds of the higher ups in Starfleet. They find out that the lieutenant who is interrogating in Home Soil was harboring the mother creature later. And it's probably one of the most graphic of Star Trek scenes. They fire a phaser and you see, almost like Indiana Jones, the faces melt type of deal, and then the creature coming up, like almost like Alien, James Cameron's Alien, and then they fire. Even Patrick Stewart's face while shooting that was like, oh, what's that? It was good.
I believe it was a beacon.
A beacon?
Yes, sir. A homing beacon. Sent from Earth.
And we've made it to the season finale.
Season finale, and probably one of my favorites. Not the but a good episode.
I love how it starts because they're waiting for Captain Picard to get back to the ship, and Data notices on the sensors there's a derelict spacecraft from 20th century Earth just floating by. Since we can't do anything, and we're still waiting for the captain, can I just beam over and check it out? Because I'm interested. He's like, fine.
It's what we do.
But get ready to beam out. So he goes over there, and him and Worf discover there's people frozen. A couple of them are still alive, and they're gonna die. And while this is happening, Picard gets back, and Riker's like, "Come on, we gotta go." And he's like, "Can we beam three more people over back as well?" And Riker's just so upset that he's like, this has turned into like a whole ordeal. And he's like, yes, quickly. And then they go into warp. They take him to sick bay. And then a couple minutes later, they ask Captain Picard to go to sick bay. And he's like, why?
What is it, Doctor?
It's the people from the capsule.
Capsule? People? What people?
The people Data beamed over.
I wasn't aware that he had.
Happening so fast, he doesn't even know that Data's brought 3 humans back on the ship.
What's going on my own starship?
And Picard's like trying to get to the neutral zone because they have to go investigate something. It's like his absolute first time. And he's like, Data's just started this pet project in the worst inconvenient time. And then he finds out, Crusher's like, oh yeah, all these people were frozen after they died. And then Picard's like, Data, they were already dead. What worse could have happened to them? He's like, well, at the time I didn't know that. And then it's at this point where it's like, oh no, are we just copy and pasting Space Seed with
it's almost exactly what it is. It's just like it was Space Seed. When the first part, it was almost identical, but then we're going to the neutral zone, which was different, and they didn't take over the ship. They weren't altered humans from the eugenics wars, I think they called it.
Yeah, it was before that. It was just greedy. It was just a cross section of people from the 1980s.
Yeah,
Data got to study them. It's like one. I love it because they're going through the bios and they're like, such and such, she was a homemaker, and Data's like, she must have been involved in construction. And then they get some kind of country singer who was probably partied a little bit too much, and then they had this Wall Street banker, and all he cared about was getting back to his money. So it's like it was interesting just to see, like, because like the neutral zone kind of took the B story and they became the A story, just to have some like interactions with how much has changed in the 24th century. And you got the businessman who's just angry and wants his money, wants to talk to his lawyer, and he's like, well, we don't have money anymore. And then demands Picard to come down, and as he's yelling over the intercom, Picard comes in and he's like, those are for official ship business only. And he's like, well, why don't you have a security lock on them? And they're like, we trust people to refrain themselves. And,
we're virtuous people in the 21st century. We have self-control.
So basically the main point of this episode was trying to set up a new enemy and a new mystery. We get reintroduced to the Romulans, who haven't been seen in decades. Mark Alamo playing the lead Romulan, who we'll later see coming back as the first Cardassian. We came to investigate our colonies have also been destroyed. And then the businessman like sees right through him. Is like, he's too ashamed. He's too prideful to ask for your help because same things happen to them. And Picard's like, that's a correct assessment. And it's like, duh, anyone watching this scene would get that. But anyway, yeah, the Romulans are back, and they make it a point of we're not friends. But we got this mystery attacks, destroying colonies, scooping them off the face of the planet.
We are back.
Next time on the Mac and Pete Project, we will be exploring Season 2 of Star Trek The Next Generation. See you next time.